Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today for our very first virtual webinar in this new day, in this world. My name is Cheryl Botieri, and I am here to welcome you as the VP of Mission Advancement, and I always say I have the best job here at Manomet because I get to connect us all to our work. And today we have a treat for you. We're going to be with Trevor Lloyd Evans, our Director of Land Bird Conservation, and he is going to be sharing with us what the birds are telling us. We hope you're all warm, somewhere safe, and are healthy, and we are excited to share this content with you and have the opportunity to connect with you, where we can't do that together as live, face-to-face, in person. So a couple of things before we get started. We want you to look at the bottom of your screen, and there's a toolbar, and you'll notice that there's a section there that says Q&A. And so at any time during the presentation, if you have a question, you can just hit that area, type in your question, and we have a moderator with us today. Chris Boudreau, who's our Donor Relations Manager, is going to be monitoring questions. And at the end of Trevor's presentation, we'll be asking Trevor these questions. So now it is my pleasure to introduce and have Trevor start. For us here at Manomet, he is surely a treasure, and we know you all know and love him. Thank you so much. And Trevor, I turn it over to you.
Cheryl, thank you so much. Let's see how this goes. This is exciting. Thank you all for volunteering as we test our first presentation in Manomet's webinar series. So let's jump in, see how we can do for about half an hour. And let's first of all go back in time. We're going to go back to the late 1800s. And this is the current Manomet. You can see our big new building in the middle. You can see our old building down in this part of the screen. I hope you can see my pointer. Down in the bottom right corner is the ocean, and up in the background, Whitehorse Beach, Stage Point, Cape Cod Bay, and we can't quite see the Cape beyond. So that's what we look like now. That's what we looked like in the late 1800s. The house was originally called Cedar Bush because it was a house built in the late 1800s, and all the rest of the land, as much of Plymouth County was in those days, was grazing land with stone walls. Some of the stone walls are still there. That's the house, and you can see it just sits up on a bare bluff after the Ernsts built it. But as soon as they did that, particularly Mrs. Ernst started putting in gardens and vegetation, and that's the same view today. So that brings us right up to date. I imagine that before everything was chopped down in the 1700s, it was rather bushy and shrubby, and now it's bushy and shrubby again today. So let's look at some of the factors that have affected bird populations over time. This was the Great Fire of 1977 with somebody called J. Laughlin. We sort of held onto each other and stood on top of the roof at Manomet and took a picture of this big fire sweeping down from somewhere near Miles Standish State Forest, just down to the almost to the nuclear power station, but not quite. Well, luckily, does that sort of large fire have effects? Certainly does. Here's an example. This is a male prairie warbler, beautiful little mask, a little bit of red on his back, and this is the commonest bird in recently burned pitch pine scrub oak forests up in Miles Standish, in that rather specific area. We've actually done a lot of years, and this is one of the boring graphs I'm going to show you, but just in years post-burn, from the year of the fire all the way down through 10, 20, 30, 40, up to 70-year-old plots that we were able to look at before and after fire in Miles Standish, the population of prairie warblers goes from 0 the year of the fire, and then up around 100 territories per square kilometer, peaks out at 250 and is really very, very thick all the way through 40 years, and then drops down again through 70. So good example of a bird population that booms under that particular circumstance and then drops back. If you look at longer term effects, we are luckily right on the edge of the bluff. a good place for migration moving up the east coast of North America. And so since 1966, Manomet has been banding the spring migrants. In other words, many of these birds are coming through in the spring, April through June, and then coming back again in the fall, August to November. And our sampling system is 50 nets, each about 40 feet long. We open those dawn to dusk 5 days a week. We have banding staff, we have volunteers, and we also have some interns helping us. This is very much a group project, and this has been going on ever since 1966. Anyone who's ever been to Manomet in the summer knows that this is our commonest bird. This is our friend, the gray catbird. And spring and fall, except during huge chickadee invasions, this is the commonest bird to find in this net. Just the right size for a hand, good for beginning banders to learn. And of course, we band our birds. Here is an example of one of the mist nets. They're awfully hard to see. If anyone asks me what is a mist net and I don't have one around, I always say, well, imagine a lady's hairnet. So you want to look nice when you're trotting off to church, at least maybe your grandparents did. Or nowadays, the guy in the McDonald's who has long hair has to put it under a net. But the idea is you don't see the net, you see the hair neatly held tightly there. And so any birds coming from left to right or right to left will drop into this more or less invisible net, drop into a panel, and then we go around regularly, take the birds out. And with any luck, we can be accompanied by school groups occasionally. So this is Patrick, and Patrick's taking them out. And here's Alan Nidal, one of our staff on the left, peering in. And almost all the children watching, except for one small lad who's watching something else. This is the banding lab, and it's a nice sized room in the old house looking out over the bluff. So we bring our birds back to the banding lab. They hang up on the hooks that you can see in front of Ian Davies here under the banding bench. Each in an individual bag. We take the bird out, we band it, we take various measurements, and then the fun part is we let it go again. So here is Keith holding a broad-winged hawk, which we've just banded, and that's about to go from the old house. You can see the new house in the background. Probably the most exciting part for any school group is, oh, can I let a bird go? You have to be awfully careful not to say that. But here are some noble students that Deb Harrison brought down one day, and we're just releasing a yellow-breasted chat. So everyone is looking at the chat. This is the focus of everything going on, except for the guy in the middle who seems to be looking at the pretty girl, but you get the idea. Sometimes we catch really unusual birds. This is a golden-winged warbler, rare and endangered and protected in many states. It's in the east. And the problem with golden-winged warblers, or one of the problems, apart from perhaps loss of winter habitat and loss of second growth habitat during the breeding season, is that they are also so close to the closely related blue-winged warbler that they hybridize. And when the two species meet, you get dominant and recessive hybrids, and after about 4 or 5 generations, maybe 25 years, something like that, you end up with pretty much all blue-winged warblers, because it turns out that they are dominant. Occasionally, you'll catch the rare double recessive, and so this is a Lawrence's warbler, a hybrid between blue-winged and golden-winged, and a Mendelian double recessive. So sort of the rarest one of all. How many have we caught? Probably about 3 in 50 years. And just one of those amazing things that you do get to see. You can actually see, apart from the fingers, and you can see a band on the foot there. Every now and again, we leave our nets open a little too late at dusk, and not really what we meant to catch. Sort of how I've titled this. This is a silver-haired bats. We also catch red bats, which are migrant, and sometimes migrate during the day. We'll catch big brown, little brown, and hoary bats as they pass through. But the goal here is to close our nets down at night before the bats come, which is good. A, you don't get bitten, and B, the bat doesn't chew into our nets, which probably cost us about $80 each, so we want to hold that at a minimum. The main benefit, I think, from having this spring and fall over a very long period here, even in 2001, we looked at the numbers of cardinals, and we corrected the numbers of cardinals that we caught in the fall from 1970 to 2001. Thank you, David Krause, for a very nice picture of a female cardinal up here. You'll see more of David's work later. And back in 1970, cardinals were pretty unusual. We have divided the period of the fall and kept track of the number of hours each of our 50 nets is open. So in other words, we've corrected for effort. We have more nets open and catch more birds, not a big surprise. And so applying those corrections, you can still see that the number of cardinals has increased greatly from 1970, when they were quite a rare bird, 1930s, 1920s. They were an exceptionally rare bird in Massachusetts, and birders would rush down to the Cape to see one if they could. There was always some question as to whether they might have escaped from cage birds in Boston. You never knew. But nowadays, we've all got cardinals. And bringing it up to date, you can see that this trend has really continued on. So from 1970 right up through 2018 here, we've had a steady increase in cardinals. What do cardinals like? Cardinals like it when you cut down the original forest. They kind of like it if you put up houses. They love it if you put up shrubs in your garden. They particularly love it if you put up feeders. I had 3 males this morning fighting over sunflowers and trying to chase each other away at the same time. And one of them then dashed back to the other side of the horse chestnut tree and fed a female, which was very nice of him. My wife Linda pointed out that they're nesting right outside our window already. So she is carrying nesting material. And here we are with this continuing upwards trend. Would that all birds were trending upwards, but I think so. Another problem we often have is when we're teaching, Evan Dalton, or when we're working with teachers as part of our National Science Foundation program on Climate Lab, we want to make this a little simpler. And so what we have done is divide the graph at the bottom into decades. So the northern cardinal down at the bottom, 1970 through 2019, and from 1970 to 79, and this is just total number banded to make it really easy, about 150, something like that. And then in the 80s, we got up to 300 odd. In the 90s, the aughts and the teens, and now we're up to 650 plus cardinals in a banding season. So the nice thing is that as we lump our data, the statistician will tell us, then we get more reliable trends going through, and we can be more sure of what we're seeing. This is something we have been playing around with. Many thanks to now Dr. Matt Cam, one of Michael Reed's graduate students at Tufts University, and Maina Handmaker and I and various other people have been pulling together a booklet that we hope will show some of the major trends. And this is more or less the way we're going to set it out. So you can see on the left spring and fall migration graphs from, again, 1969 or 1970, spring and fall, going on through. And basically, without going into any great details, this is a nice Monte Carlo type of thing where you throw thousands and thousands of iterations at the data, filling in any gaps, and ending up with a solid blue line, which is the best estimate we can get of what populations are doing. And what, of course, they're doing is they're declining. We want to put the information of the breeding area. So in the center, bottom right here, we have a map of the distribution of American redstarts. This is a warbler. It's a warbler that catches flies, so it acts like a flycatcher. It breeds throughout the brownish area on the top of the map, and then migrates down through the yellowish areas and winters in Central America, the Caribbean islands, and northern South America. And what we are doing is trying to isolate some of the factors. We'll have text facing this, and the text is going to say that American redstarts, with our little mayfly logo down here and caterpillar logo down here, depend very much in spring on insects flying after they have hatched out from the early leaf out of trees. And if there is a reduction in flying insects, and I would utter the dread word neonicotinoids, some of the pesticides have caused tremendous decreases in all sorts of insect and flying invertebrate populations. And so this has really affected all of the aerial insectivores. In other words, the flycatchers, the American redstarts, the whippoorwills, all of those sorts of species. The other problem with American redstarts is that up in the north, in the breeding area here, they really prefer scrubby forest edges and regenerating areas of forest from fields and all fields, shrub. And in Central America, they really like and northern South America, they really like fairly mature forest. especially the adult males that separate out. And so several problems. The forest is declining in these areas as human populations increase, and there's a decline in the shrubby habitat. We've also commissioned a number of paintings by quite a few of our staff. All of the paintings that we put in here, I'm not quite sure what we'll do with these. We might make them a centerfold, we might make them an index. But this is the story of Carolina wrens, and Carolina wrens are a long, slow, steady increase. This species is a permanent resident, doesn't go anywhere, and is responding to the warming climate by pushing its range further north. So again, since about the 1950s, these have been pushing into southern New England and all the way up into northern New England now. One of David Krause's photographs on the top of a Carolina wren, and then down below, a really nice painting by Laura Young, one of our banders. And so we're going to use those extensively. This is great. For each of our species, we've got about 30 odd species. I'm just going to show you 3 or 4 of them here. Another story of the scrub shrub birds is the rufous-sided towhee, eastern towhee, chewink, if you're old enough. And again, the spring and the fall graphs just declined down from reasonable number in the 70s down to a very, very few. We catch 2 or 3 or 5 or something like that. So again, a forest edge bird, a scrub shrub bird, and feeding on insects in the spring, but losing a lot of that forest habitat and wintering within North America. So too much habitat, too many people, bigger fields, large expansion of agriculture. These birds feed on seeds in the fall. Herbicides get rid of weeds, which produce the seeds, and fields are ever expanding. So a species that is a good indicator. Every now and again you get an anomaly, and this is a Baybreasted Warbler. Again, one of David Krause's photographs up the top. Just as leaf out happens, you can see oak leaves just coming out here, little green caterpillars just probably beginning to emerge, and you can still see the oak flowers right down in this part of the picture. And down below, lovely painting by Sasha Munters. Again, one of our banders. I'll keep saying that. They're all one of our banders. And they had the advantage of seeing these birds in the hand. I hope it increased their artistic appreciation, but the end result is great. So what's been happening with Baybreasted Warblers? Always a very rare bird. Back in the 70s up to about 73, a rare bird that we sometimes caught in the fall, and then a big peak from 1974 through 79, which was the spruce budworm outbreak that started in the Great Lakes and spread all the way east through the Boreal forest, which is where these birds breed, and ended up in Nova Scotia. And that ended up with a huge peak here. We've had a few little peaks since, but they really don't even show up in the data. And spring, more or less, 0. So here's a bird that responded to an abundance of food, a superabundance of food. Again, a temporary thing, rather like the response of prairie warblers to fire in the state forest. And unfortunately, settling back to a low carrying. So what about these declines? What is serious and what isn't? Looking at all of our data, and this is just a theoretical graph, but if you had 100 birds in 1970, let's follow the pink line. And if you are decreasing at 2% a year, which doesn't sound too bad, not great, obviously, increasing is better than decreasing. But if you were decreasing at 2% per year on the pink line from 1970, up to about the year 2000, go up to the graph here, and you'll find that you've lost pretty much 50% of your population. And unfortunately, that 2% per year is the overall average for all the species that we've been looking at spring and fall. Some are increasing, more are decreasing, and overall birds as a whole are decreasing at about 2% per year in our data. So that varies from location to location. Is everything going extinct? Well, probably, eventually. Everything will eventually. Dinosaurs aren't here anymore, and they were around for a long time. But what have we actually lost since about 1800? Very rare Labrador duck, Eskimo curlew, the great auk, passenger pigeon, Carolina parakeet, ivory-billed woodpecker, Backman's warbler, and then 2 subspecies. The heath hens that used to be on Martha's Vineyard died out in 1932, but there's still greater prairie chickens around. And the dusky seaside sparrow in Florida, the population winked out eventually in 1980, and a few remained in cages. The last one was called Walt. Thank you, Walt Disney, for trying to resuscitate the population. So here we have an aged biologist and an extinct bird. This is a passenger pigeon from female passenger pigeon, in fact, from our reference collection. And the last passenger pigeon died in 1914 in Cincinnati. What about all birds then? Let's bring everything up to date and look from 1970 through 2019 in spring. We pulled out these data at the end of last year, and you can see that long decline we were talking about from 1970, and it goes all the way through into the 90s. Maybe it's just a spring thing, and so we should look at the fall data, and perhaps the birds are going a different way. Let's look at the fall data. And unfortunately, again, we're seeing exactly the same story. So on a sample size of 161,200 odd birds over all of the falls in 1970 through 2019, we're seeing again that trend. Any astute observers will have said, what's happening on the right-hand end of the line? And so here we'll just show one of, I hope, the last of the graphs, but it's a fun graph. And on the top we have spring and fall together on the bars, and from 1970 through 1994, here was that decline at the 2% or greater, actually. But interestingly, from 1995 on the bottom graph, spring and fall again on the same graph, going all the way to 2019, actually. Especially spring data are holding up pretty well. So on average, we're seeing a decline. Different species are declined early. And on average, since about the mid-90s, we're seeing a stabilization, which I hope has something to do with all the efforts we all put into conservation, either nationally or internationally or just locally in your own backyard. Many of these birds go down into Central and South America for the winter. They really are Central American birds that come up to us, breed with us, and then go back home. And that's back home. We have had expeditions in the past with students, a lot of fun, going down to Belize, seeing resident species like these red-capped mannequins dancing around in their leks and displaying before the females. And lo and behold, we find our birds with a beautiful male hooded warbler. So this is the wintering area for many of these birds. We looked at the winter ranges, and we found that of the species that winter within northeastern North America, about a third are declining. Of those that winter throughout North America down into the south and east, about 50% were declining. Central and South American areas, 70%. And the worst thing you can be is a bird who lives in a tropical forest, like that hooded warbler. And we were finding about 84% of the species last time we looked at this that undergo those long migrations in winter in tropical forest habitat, which of course is decreasing as deforestation continues and human populations expand. That was the story. Well, another good way to look at your data is what is everyone else finding, and what are we doing? So here we have Mystery Bird, who has just hatched out. Mystery Bird is a one-day-old osprey. Our research associate Alan Poole and a bunch of people from Mass Audubon and the Westport River area have been banding ospreys with our bands for a very long time. It goes back to some great people back in the 1970s when Brian Harrington and I arrived. Joe and Bill Fernandez started off this effort. Right after the DDT era had decreased the populations of ospreys throughout all of North America. And we compare with the breeding bird survey. So we compare our migration data with what do people find during the breeding. This again is done by volunteers from the Fish and Wildlife Service. And the basic story there is that any blue dots within the population range of both eastern and western ospreys and Florida ospreys, which don't migrate anywhere, is an increase of 1.5% per year or better. So that's a good thing. Ospreys are doing just fine. Let's look at one of the birds that Mass Audubon has been producing, the atlases, 1970s, and the 2007-2011 atlas. I was lucky enough to participate in both of those, as was our first director, Kathleen Anderson. And you can see back in 74, 79, ospreys were just confined to the very southern part of Massachusetts. And 2007 through 2011, our friends at Mass Audubon have been documented in all of the east and up the Central Valley, and nowadays ospreys are right up into Canada. an amazing success story. Here's a least flycatcher, which used to be common on all the cranberry farms around, including Manomet. And the bad news here is that red is bad. Red is declining at 1.5% per year or worse. Again, during the same sort of period that we were misnetting, so looking at breeding bird survey data from the feds from 1966 to 2003 in this case, but it didn't change. So what sort of challenges are we facing for the future? Fake photograph alert. What we are looking at here is we are looking at the carbon dioxide parts per million. I thank Eric and Jennifer Hushaw for lending us some of the slides that they were using for their stories. And blue down below is temperature in degrees centigrade. And we're going from about 400,000 years ago on the left up to the present day. And then let's push a little bit further, and you'll find that today our carbon dioxide parts per million is now up to about 400 parts per million. And let's jump a little bit further, and by 2050 we expect it to be increasing up around 470. And that's assuming we all do everything right. Who knows? But that's probably one of the greatest problems. What happens to that carbon dioxide? It increases the temperature as it goes on up and forms a warm cloud around the upper atmosphere. That increases the temperatures on the land and on the sea surface and over the oceans and right up in the troposphere. And the humidity, the evaporation of water as the ocean warms and as the land water warms, increases humidity. We get more humidity in the air. So we get a warming trend. And at least in the northeast here, we're going to get a wet trend. And going forwards, we expect sea ice to be decreasing. We expect snow cover to be less. We expect glaciers, however you like to say it, to be diminishing, and things like the Greenland ice cap and the Arctic and Antarctic decreasing. At the moment, about 93% of that warming trend, therefore, is sucked up by the oceans, and the rest of it not very much. So far, not necessarily affecting many of the land bird populations from that point of view, but is it warming? Yes, it is. And are we seeing trends? Yes, we are. Just taking you through global temperatures, basically red is warmer through the 1800s, 1920-ish, 1930s, see some warmth coming in, particularly up in the north and down in the south, in the Arctic regions, the 50s, the 60s. And as we come on up with this NOAA data into the 80s, the 90s, the aughts, and we're seeing this warming trend all the way through 2015. So it's happening. It's being recorded by everybody. It's not just us. And the effect is a decrease in many, many places. Down in the bottom of our picture here, we have Alaska, Stephen Brown, Brad Wynn, many other people. I've worked a little bit up in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, mostly playing with shorebirds up there. And we have seen more and more open ocean to the north as that ice pack has retreated, even in the period that we've been going. And what that does is you find the permafrost, which is nearly all of the north shore here of the Arctic Refuge. All of the gray cliffy area is actually just ice. And the tundra is maybe a meter on the top with that seasonal warming just during the summer season. And all the shorebirds and all the geese, magnificent numbers of birds going up there. Land birds, yeah. Land birds also, this is a blackpoll warbler. And blackpoll warblers that we catch in the fall can either turn up at lean weight, which is about 11 grams, or they can turn up very fat. And very fat can be 18, 20, 22, 23 grams. So this is a fat pole. And this fat pole turns out from looking at stable isotopes and working with some people from the University of Maine in Orono. Becky Holberton particularly headed up this project that used a lot of data from Manomet and other bird observatories. And many of the blackpoll warblers that we find here in Manomet during the fall trace back to southern Alaska and just west of the Great Lakes. So some of these birds are coming down in very long migrations to the east before they go south. So yes, it's affecting land birds as well. And down below, we were looking at the stable isotopes, and the blue areas indicate the origin the breeding origin of the birds that come down to Manomet. All we do is sniff a tail feather and then analyze the isotopes of hydrogen in there. Has that had an effect, this warming then, on what we see? Well, here's the theory. With some friends from Boston University, Richard Premack, Professor Premack and his students. We were looking at the mean arrival time of a theoretical bird in spring. And as the populations decrease, then there shouldn't be any difference in the timing, but the very earliest birds might go missing. So anyone looking for the first birds will see them coming back a little bit later. On the other hand, the birds may be coming back a little bit earlier, and if they are, then the first observation is not going to show anything. So that's probably not the way to look at it. And what we have done looking at Manomet's data is to analyze for a whole range of species. White-throated sparrows, for example, in the spring are coming back about a day earlier per degree centigrade warming. And that trend continues through a whole lot of spring migrants. This graph is just to remind me, and don't worry about the four-letter codes, but the blue four-letter codes below the black line are all the birds wintering in North America, and these birds are coming back appreciably earlier. The green birds winter in Central America and the Caribbean, and some of those are coming back earlier because they can still detect a warmer spring, and so they come back as the leaf out gets earlier, and they're able to synchronize with the caterpillar if they need to be. And the red birds, unfortunately, are going right down into South America. They are not coming back any earlier. They have no indication that it's a warmer spring down there. How do you know? And so those birds are at risk of coming back at the standard genetically determined time. They're working on a circannual rhythm, and those birds are coming back at the same time and perhaps missing the peak of food. Just to put that into something that, again, we can share with school groups very easily during our programs. We looked at blue jays and we looked at decades. And from the 1970s, we found that the average blue jay in spring of all the population that we banned comes back about the 16th of May. And then the 80s, we're back to the 14th, the 12th, the 8th, and just the recent decade back to the 5th of May. So blue jays are synchronizing well with warmer springs and are coming back earlier. And ruby-throated hummingbirds, let's look at that one. Nothing seemed to happen. They all came back around the 21st, 22nd, 23rd of May. And then again, they started to respond right around 2010. So these are the sorts of trends we're able to pick out in the broad. We have a lot of individual stories on individual birds, obviously. That's the reason that we're continuing to do our work at the banding lab. And many thanks to all of the very nice folks, volunteers, students, members, staff, boards, all the financial folks, grants, contracts, you name it, and the photographers and the artists who are pulling it all together, and we love sharing it with folks. And I'll leave you with a quiz bird. I think that's a really good place for me to stop, and that's a very good place for Chris. You want to take over?
All right. Well, Trevor, thank you so much, folks. If remember, down at the bottom on your toolbar is a Q&A box. If you have any questions, feel free to type it in there, and we'll answer it. If you don't see a toolbar at the bottom, just use your mouse to hover over underneath the screen, and it should pop up. Trevor, we do have a couple of quick questions. Number one being, what are we doing about the banding lab this spring? Are we going to be open? Are we going to be collecting data? How will the current restrictions on gatherings impact that?
Yeah, that's just the saddest thing. This is really depressing. Obviously, we talked with Nancy Dempsey on the board and President Ellis, and Lizzie Schuler, who's coming in, and all of the staff agree that we could not possibly have interns coming and living in the house. We could not have our seasonal staff come in. And that left it just to Trevor and Evan Dalton, who's our lead educator, and Alan Neidl, a staff biologist who's also working on the Holmes Farm project, a long experienced bander. We have had to cut way, way back. And so the decision was, and I think it's probably a wise one, that there should not be anyone handling birds and then passing them off to somebody else in the banding lab and birds being banded, and just avoiding all of the contact, which just seems to make sense. So we are going to cut way back. take a very small sample, just the three of us. We're going in on different days, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and we'll take a very small sample of birds. And the main goals are to get our winter populations banded, any that weren't already banded last fall. And probably in the summer, we'll try to band the local birds on the property. And with any luck, we'll then have the same sort of ratio of banded birds if we can start up in the fall. I hope we can. I'm very, very sad that we are not able to run a full mist netting operation, but it just wasn't practical. It probably didn't make sense.
Trevor, do you anticipate any effects on the long-term data with this reduced banding season?
Well, it depends, doesn't it? The whole goal was to reverse global warming. Well, it's actually happening a little bit. Probably the warming itself is obviously going to continue, and that's not really going to have a great effect, but it turns us in the right direction. If there's any way that societies, all societies, not just US and North American societies, can turn it around and actually get a jump into what we really should be doing, which is to reduce the warming, then that's great. And that will perhaps show itself in at least a leveling and a steadying of change in the temperatures and the birds trying to adapt. The nice thing about birds, and the reason that we keep our efforts going, is that they are extremely good environmental indicators. This was true in the bad years of DDT. We found that peregrine falcons and bald eagles and brown pelicans, ospreys were declining because they were at the peak. Go back to the old canary in the coal mine if you want to go way back. And there was a bird that was very sensitive to carbon monoxide, so the miners would take him down the mine, and that was the indicator. And I think that one of Manomet's goals, both in the shorebird and the landbird section, is to continue to monitor on as broad a scale as we can. And we at least will have some figures that show whether we're making any progress. If you're a whale out in Cape Cod Bay, the fishing fleets, Marissa and McMahon told us, have pretty much stopped fishing or declined greatly because of the lack of ability to move their product. Not necessarily bad news for whales, right? So we'll see. We'll see.
Has there ever, in your 40 plus years at Manomet, Trevor, has there ever been a disruption like this to the banding season?
40 plus years, huh? No, unfortunately, this is the first time ever. We have always continued. Sometimes we would have greater effort, longer coverage, but at each time we always had at least 5 days per week coverage, and we always tried to run our nets dawn to dusk. And if we had to close our nets, the interruptions in coverage were basically weather. And so if it starts to rain, as it is right outside my window now, then we would have to close our mist nets so that birds didn't get wet in the mist nets. If we had very cold spells or very hot spells, we had to reduce. But we are able to allow for those slight differences in coverage by comparing the number of nets times the hours they were open. So birds per net per hour is our indicator of seasonal comparisons.
And do you anticipate that the warmer winter we've had here in New England is going to affect migration this year?
Yeah, I think some things are earlier already. It's a trend, as we've seen from some of the data we've presented here, and many other people are seeing the same thing. Yeah, the migration seems to be a little earlier this year. And last year was a good, steady spring migration, and then a very disappointing fall migration. So this sort of tends to push you into areas of study like, okay, the birds came back in the spring, but not so many came back in the fall. If you're at Manomet on the coast in the fall, we find that often as much as 90–95% of the population of all birds passing through are birds that were hatched that year. So hatching year birds coming by. And so maybe it's productivity. And these are the sort of deeper questions we can look at, especially with the ability of some of our university friends to bring some powerful statistics to this. And I think we are getting earlier and earlier migration. It's certainly true of many of the mass things like eBird. Cornell is noting this, and so Manomet also. And I've been talking to various other bird observatories during this period. They're all saying more or less the same thing.
And one question that just came in, is it possible to drive in and walk the paths around the Manomet property if you wear a mask and keep at least 6 feet away from others?
We really don't want that to happen. We have kept the property closed, not just to the public in our mist netting area, just the 18 acres of the forested land that is clearly posted, no entry, please don't come. And we keep that because we are, after all, a wildlife refuge in a small way as well. We are an area where the birds are protected. And so we only go round our mist nets about every 40 minutes or so, roughly, I suppose, on average, something like that. Remove the birds, any birds that are caught in the mist net, bring them back to the lab, let them go again, let them get back to their feeding. And we close down during the breeding season, and we close down the nets, of course, during the winter when it's too cold. But we do keep that as a closed area for the birds. People are welcome right now to walk up the roads, and we are in the process of putting up signage at the Holmes farm so that people who just walk in are welcome to walk on up to the road and up to the bluff. And I think that's okay right now. Folks can come in and walk up to the bluff, but not into the areas where the migrant birds are trying to rest, trying to feed. And those are all clearly posted, and we appreciate everyone respecting that. We don't even have our staff go there except for the bandas, or if we have groups coming in, we're delighted to take them around with the bandas, and they can see the whole process. So we love to have groups visit. Again, one of the tragedies, we can't have the groups coming. We had so many classes from universities down to schools, kindergartens, old folks, bird clubs, all sorts of people, and a number of lectures that we had all lined up. Evan Dalton and myself had a good series of lectures, and just the early ones got off through February, and then we all had to close it down. So it's very sad.
All right. Well, Trevor, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl Botieri now.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Trevor, and thank you to all of you that came and joined us today for this time to be together to learn. It was wonderful seeing all the pictures, Trevor. It makes me long for being back to work. It is sad. It is definitely sad. But we're here planning with you, and we have more planned for you. And so a lot of the program staff are already working on other presentations like today, as well as taking you in the field in a safe way to do so. And so please go to our website and check out events. That's where we'll be loading them up and scheduling them. We will also be sending you out emails and invitations. Please let us know how we're doing. We want some feedback on this virtual programming. And we want to make sure you know that we're recording all of them as well. So after today, we'll be sending out a link so that you will have the recording to share with friends, and we'll be able to give you a little bit more information how you might do that. Let's see.
Cheryl, I apologize. If I could jump in with one question that just came in from Lauren Conant.
Sure.
He's curious, Trevor, about the photo nocturnal monitoring of migratory birds and how helpful that is, and if we're able to be species specific.
Oh, trust Lauren to think of that. Very good point. Yes, we have been doing that. We can't cover everything in one talk, but Evan Dalton has actually been putting up 2 of the nocturnal monitoring devices, one on the barn at the Holmes farm, and one actually up on the chimney of the original house. And we've been recording what goes through. It takes a long time to download all of the chips. Evan is getting really good at this, and we will be presenting something about that information as well. We're happy to do that. Often it's very different, Lauren. What flies overhead does not necessarily come down. Evan actually stole one of the recorders and took it back to his house just to see what was happening at his house, which is, I think, down in Lakeville. And Evan said he detected Virginia rails flying over at night. Whoa, who'd have thought? Just now I have the microphone. One last thing, Cheryl, if I may. The quiz bird. This was the first for Massachusetts ever recorded, ever. And we then also caught a different bird 2 years later, which was the second of that species for Massachusetts. It's about as dull and difficult as you can get. It looks a bit like a flycatcher, but it isn't. It's a very small vireo called Bell's vireo. And the nearest one should be somewhere in the central part of the US, maybe, and a few in Southern California. So shows you what may turn up in your list. Thanks very much. Over to you, Cheryl.
All right, well, we are done. Our time together has come to a close. Please, again, take a look at the website. We are working in other programming options virtually, and we hope to see you soon. That link will be going out by tomorrow, so again, you can share this. And again, just thank you for supporting everything that we do. And we hope you and your family and your colleagues all stay safe and healthy.
Thank you for dropping by.